Two and a Half Admins, episode 222. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, you've got one of your plugs, Alan. DKMS versus Kmod, the essential guide for ZFS on Linux.
Yeah, as we continue to support ZFS on every platform that people use it on, the biggest thing we run into is people running ZFS on Linux and having problems every time they update their kernel. And so we talk about the pros and cons of the two different main ways of doing that. The first being DKMS, where the build system will automatically rebuild ZFS to match the kernel every time it updates, or a Kmod, where Clara provides as a service the ability to have a package that in a repo that will be a Kmod built of ZFS that matches your kernel, and how you can do that yourself as well.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. Let's do some news then. Windows Server 2025 takes admins by surprise. Just randomly upgrading a major version overnight, no big deal.
You know, it was bad enough when Windows 7 machines were just like spontaneously attempting to upgrade to Windows 10 overnight, whether you told them not to or not. But this one caught me by surprise. I say it caught me by surprise. I'm talking about the news, to be clear. I haven't seen it in person yet, thank God. But how horrifying.
Very. These servers, when you're running them, it's usually doing something specific. And you don't want it just rebooting that often anyway, right? Like you want to control the updates. But then to just come in and find that it's not even the same version of the OS anymore, you'd be like, who touched this? I'm going to beat them senseless. But it sounds like a mistake made it think that the OS upgrade was one of the security updates and apply it to the machine anyway without ever asking anybody.
I have a lot of trouble finding the words on this one because it's horrifyingly sloppy is what it is. I know I'm starting to sound like every old man everywhere who said things were better when he was younger, but corporations the size of Microsoft just did not used to be this sloppy with QA on shipping products. There used to be this sense of like, oh, well, we have a certain standing we need to maintain and we need to measure twice and cut once. And it feels like all that's just gone out the window. And good enough or close to good enough is, well, that'll do, pig. That'll do.
Yeah, I think part of that might be the fact that Windows Server isn't their flagship product that they make all their money off of anymore. It's all their Azure cloud stuff. And so they maybe don't treat it the same. Although if you go back to the early days of Windows Server stuff, it's like if you were going to upgrade from this version to that version, it came on a CD in the mail. And you had to go around to each machine and plug it in and do it. You weren't just automatically installing updates from the internet and then being surprised when you have a different version of the OS tomorrow.
Well, Microsoft did publish issue details. Windows Server 2022 and Server 2019 unexpectedly upgraded to Windows Server 2025. And in this issue, they say some devices upgraded automatically. This was observed in environments that used third-party products to manage the update of clients and servers. So they're basically blaming it on someone else.
Right, although one of those companies called Heimdall says that Microsoft mistakenly labeled the Server 2005 upgrade as being KB 5044284, which is a security update. And so something got left over in the build system or something, and the update got tagged the same as the security update, and so their software decided to install it. I think the other thing that I would say is, compared to in the ye olden days, it upgraded from Server 2019 to 2025, and it worked on the first try, and it rebooted, and it came up, and it was right. Maybe the software has gotten a little better.
That kind of blew my mind also. I was not aware that there even was a modern in-place upgrade option for the server side of the OS. I mean, the consumer side, it's been working pretty well since the 7 to 10. But on the server side, I'm not sure when that became an option. I've always needed to, whether I wanted to or not, do a complete reload and manually migrate workloads from one box to another.
Yeah, usually it was always a good time to get a fresh install anyway, because it was always going to work better as a fresh install.
Back to the point of Microsoft mislabeling it as a security update or a feature update instead of a major operating system version upgrade. That all seems like a very facile excuse to me, and it feels like we're ignoring the core point, which is that there ought to be more separation between a major OS version upgrade and either a feature or security update in the first place. Like, That feels like, oops, I accidentally mistook the Lamborghini for the baby's stroller. Like, how the hell did you do that? Like, those are not the same thing. They don't go in the same bin. They don't look like each other. You don't just, no. If Windows Server was, a rolling release distribution like some of the Linuxes, where it's like, no, we've evolved beyond version upgrades, and the host OS is always expected to work within acceptable parameters, and we don't expect applications to cease working within acceptable parameters either, and that's just what the ecosystem does. That's one thing. But that's not the expectation anybody has of Windows. The expectation everybody has of Windows, and it is a well-earned expectation, is that even if everything goes perfectly when you do a major version upgrade from one to the next, it's entirely possible that some of your applications will refuse to work properly on the new version, and that will need to be sorted out.
Or it may be that even if the software works, your support contract with the provider, says we only support these things, right? We've not tested it with Server 2025 enough yet, so you get no support if you're running it on 2025. You're on your own. And while Microsoft pulled the update to stop it from happening to more people, there's no sign that they're going to offer some kind of rollback. And, I don't think you'd want to try to roll back from Server 2025 back to 2019. While the upgrade process maybe has gotten better, I doubt the rollback has.
ZFS rollback -R.
The only way to make it actually happen.
Well, one of the Register articles that we'll link to brought up the issue of licensing as well. They quote the chairman of this Heimdall company, who says, the licensing check for Server 2025 happens only after the upgrade, which is completely irrational and adds further risk for end users.
Yeah, I can see you running into problems if you get upgraded not by choice and then get told that, oh, your license doesn't work for this version.
There's also the fact that Windows Server 2025 currently has issues running on hardware with massive numbers of processors. Logical processors 256 or higher have been known to exhibit serious problems on Windows 2025 that were not present in earlier versions. So, there's a lot of potential for chaos there. And I think at this point, there's probably not a whole lot of reason to go on enumerating all the different ways that can make your life suck, because we could be here all day talking about all the many ways that it could absolutely suck to suddenly find out that your servers have just magically changed to a different operating system version than they were when you got up that morning.
Yeah, this is definitely a nightmare fuel for most sysadmins.
Before we move on from this, we probably ought to talk about the Windows upgrade sloppiness bleeding down into the consumer side of things as well. A lot of consumers were surprised and upset when they discovered their Windows 11 warning them that Windows 11 23H2 was ending support and exhorting them to upgrade. The problem with that is Windows 11 23H2 isn't actually scheduled to end support until next November, not this November, and 11 23H2 is actually the current correct version that you should be running. That upgrade notice, which is false, closely follows the legitimate upgrade warning that users of 22H2 were given earlier this month. So it's just a complete sloppy chocolate mess over in Microsoft land right now.
Something that was announced at Ignite recently was Windows 365 Link, what they're calling the first cloud PC device for Windows 365.
And what we'll be calling Joe's favorite new lightweight Linux local machine in about 5 years.
Well, maybe, except that it's got a lot of secure boot stuff that I don't think you can turn off, unlike with the Wise 5070 thin clients that me and the Linux After Dark guys like to mess with.
Yeah, the original Xbox was unhackable too. How'd that work out?
Well, indeed.
Yeah, so I've used Windows 365 for a customer, and basically they give me a virtual machine inside their network, and I use Windows 365 to connect to that, and it does the whole two-factor authentication and everything. But this thing basically would replace the PC on your desk at the office with this little box that basically does nothing other than connect to Windows 365, where your actual machine is a VM running in a data center somewhere. I can see the appeal, but at the same time, it's subject to all the latency of your Wi-Fi and your network and your internet connection. And so I'm not a huge fan of moving my entire computer into the cloud.
I'm not a huge fan of moving my entire computer into the cloud because I don't trust the cloud to manage it for me. I mean, Microsoft has absolutely shit-canned an Xbox Live account of mine before and claimed that it never existed afterward, which tells me that I really don't want to just give Microsoft like all of my data and programs and infrastructure and everything and just imagine that it will be okay as some random consumer.
Right. And this is more targeted at the corporate environment and especially where it would be hosted. So it's maybe not even the cloud, but this is running, at your company's data center. But even then, we really assume we'll always have an internet connection, but that's really not true.
Yeah, we assume no such thing. A lot of the industry likes to assume that. Alan and I do not. I suspect Joe doesn't either. We are big fans of having control of your own infrastructure and still being able to do things when the link to the great big world network goes down, as we expect it to do every now and again.
But you can see the appeal for something like this for IT managers, at least. Being able to say, oh yeah, let's not worry about endpoint security, essentially.
If you mean career IT managers of the sort where the manager is capitalized and the IT is in, a typeface about 3-point sizes smaller, yes, I absolutely see the appeal. On the other hand, if you are an IT manager who eventually wound up in a management position because you did a lot of work in the trenches and you actually know your butt from hole in the ground, no, I don't really think it's all that appealing at all. There are a huge number of downsides to this, and it's another one of those nothing is ever truly new under the sun. We keep going through these cycles. I was preaching to people about these cycles where we go in between distributed and localized computing all the way back in the early 90s. And we're still doing it. And every time the cycle tips from one side to the other, everybody always acts like centralized computing is this brand new idea nobody's ever explored before. Well, folks, in 1991, I was operating a Honeywell 3B2 AT&T 3B2 computers, and I forget the model number of the Honeywell mini computers in various different naval installations, most of which had been there since the 80s. Centralized computing with distributed clients is not new. It has its downsides, and it always will.
But the internet's much faster now.
Speaking of the internet being much faster now, when I was in high school and I worked at the power plant, they had a thing where you dialed in with a modem to connect to Citrix to control a machine at the plant from home or from the road. And that was, remote desktop, just terribly, terribly slow compared to what we have now. But I can see some of the advantages of if everybody's desktop is just a VM, then I can run it all off ZFS and snapshot them all and not have to worry about people's machines and being able to roll them back if they screw them up. But it's a lot to trade off for that. And if you're getting down to that point, what do you need the thin client for?
Just to make absolutely sure nobody does any work anywhere but your precious cloud.
Exactly. You're eliminating a lot of variables.
And that is a lot of the time what centralized computing with distributed clients is genuinely about. Sometimes it's about performance. Again, back in the 80s when you were looking at centralized, mini computer mainframe setups very frequently, you couldn't afford to distribute that amount of computing to that many different workstations. So it made sense to have one single massively powerful for the time machine with a bunch of thin clients that accessed it. But more than that, usually the shift towards centralized computing, it's about control. It's about making sure things happen the way that the centralized entity wants to enforce them happening. And that's one thing when you're a company and you're the one doing the enforcing of your own policies. It's another entirely when you're an individual or a smaller company who is at the mercy of a corporate giant who is setting the policies and dictating everything, and you just got to like it or lump it.
Yeah, I guess in my use case, the whole point of using Windows 365 is that virtual desktop is the thing that's trusted to let me access the sensitive data, and I can access it from whatever machine I happen to have rather than needing a dedicated special piece of hardware that's been blessed.
To me, it is a compliance manager's dream and a sysadmin's nightmare, because there's going to be all sorts of problems with people having shitty Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. But if your job is as a suit who likes to tick boxes, you can see how Microsoft can sell it to them. All these buzzwords about enhancing security, increasing efficiency, sustainability. It seems like such an easy sell to me, to the people who don't really know, as you say, Jim, what it's like to have boots on the ground.
The thing that always happens with that sort of thing is it's very easy to sell all sorts of really dumb things to people whose prime occupation is manager. The ones where manager comes first and anything else is just kind of a niche that's tacked on later, but the primary thing is manager. You can sell things to managers on the basis of easy management while ignoring physical reality, pretty easily for quite some time until you've sold so much dodgy nonsense that doesn't make sense that everything just flat stops working. And then you have a catastrophe and you get to recover from that catastrophe. And there's a whole bunch of sturm and angst that could have been avoided if you just kept a tighter grasp on reality as opposed to management fantasy in the first place.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to 2.5admins.com/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy. Linux Matters for upbeat family-friendly adventures. Linux After Dark for silly challenges and philosophical debates. Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux. Hybrid Cloud Show for everything public and private cloud. And Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at 2.5admins.com/support. Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. And if you want to send any questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Another perk of being a patron is you get to skip the queue, which is what Thor has done. Now, Thor wrote in to ask about securely backing up a friend's ZFS server and vice versa, but we did cover that in episode 218, so do check that out, Thor. And this mostly boils down to use ZFS delegation to sort out your permissions and ZFS encryption if you're worried about privacy. But Thor did add a new wrinkle. Can we use the force command option in SSHD config to tighten things down even further?
Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with force command, this is an option you can set in the SSHD config file that controls how your SSH server operates, so that you can say if user foo is to SSH in, well, foo is only allowed to use this short list of commands, and if foo tries to use any other commands, we'll just throw an error and say, no, you can't do that. Or you can also set it to just automatically run a single command the instant the user logs in, no matter what they do. In theory, you might faff about with this to try to look for a little additional security, but honestly, I don't think it's a good effort. You can already limit what a user is able to do on a Linux system well enough with simple permissions, and with the ability to use ZFS permission delegation to allow an otherwise completely unprivileged user that can't even see outside of their own home directory to manage what they need to do on the ZFS side of things. I think trying to faff about with force command is just going to be an exercise in making your system more fragile without making it particularly more secure.
Yeah, you can lock down what they're able to do well enough that you probably don't need to do it. Although when they brought up the force command thing and they thought that they would need, because they need to be able to do ZFS list and ZFS receive and ZFS send, and those are 3 separate commands, that they wouldn't be able to do that unless they created a bunch of separate users and had this different force command for each. And I'm like, well, I happen to know a way around that part. So the way SSH works with the authorized keys file, you can specify a command similar to the force command in SSHD config, but you can specify a command per SSH key. So you can actually have 3 different SSH keys, each one only able to do a certain command. So then your client, you'd have to teach it to SSH with this key and it'll run ZFS list, and then SSH with this key and it'll run ZFS receive. But, you'd end up having to hard code the whole ZFS command. So you'd also need the name of the data set to be part of the command. So you need a different key for every data set for every receive. And it quickly gets out of hand. And like Jim said, you don't have to be given this lockdown user any sudo or anything. You can just use ZFS delegation to allow that user to run those specific ZFS commands and nothing else.
I think that if you really wanted to chase some kind of super secret squirrel extra secure configuration, probably the way to look at doing it would be potentially having the remote side run in a container that had the ZFS pool passed through into the container so that you could limit the non-ZFS side of things even beyond the permission side by having that user trapped in a sandbox container that only had access to ZFS. That would make it a little bit more difficult for that ZFS replication only user to do anything on the host system. I don't really see even that as worthwhile, but I think it makes a lot more sense than the other approach.
Yeah. So there'll be an article coming out on Clara's website in a couple of weeks on how to use the feature we built where you can delegate just one data set and all of its children to an LXD container, for example, on Ubuntu. And so with that, yes, you would basically have it so that they have access to a container, not your whole system. And inside that container, they can see the one data set from your pool that you've given them and nothing else. And then that would stop them from being able to see the rest of your whole machine because they're in their own complete namespace, different processes, different usernames, nothing. So they could never see any of the other files or other parts of the pool in your system. And that way they'd be able to do all the ZFS commands they need, but only to the one data set they have access to.
Is this my inexperience showing here, or is a much simpler solution put a small separate box in each other's houses with just the data sets that you want on, say, just a 2-disk mirror? Just keep it completely simple and separated.
Yeah, sure. If you can afford, and when I say afford, whether we're talking about, the cost of the hardware or just the space to host it or the power or whatever, but sure, if you can afford a separate physical box, that makes all the sense in the world. Absolutely. Have a backup box like just for that purpose, and that's great. But I think that an awful lot of people are not necessarily going to want to not only have their own main computer and their own backup computer, but also their own backup computer that's just for their friend, and their friend will do the same thing for them. Like, that sounds a little harder to convince a lot of people to do.
Yeah, and who's responsible for upgrading the OS on this machine that doesn't get used for anything except for your backups?
How long will it take you to get your friend to bother to turn it back on after a power outage?
Well, if you've got a VPN directly into that machine from your network,
which will be down every time you have to upgrade it.
Yeah, true.
Again, how long will it take to get your friend to address the issue when there's a power outage and it's off, or when somebody didn't know what it was and unplugged it and moved it, or. Please trust somebody who deals with machines that are hosted in people's homes. It can be very difficult to get them to give a crap if the thing that's in their home isn't actually mission critical to what they do in their own home. Even if it's mission critical to them at work, it's real hard to convince a C-level who's got like a backup server hosted in their own home to bother turning the damn thing back on after a power outage. It will sometimes require weeks, and that's when it's their own data that they're not backing up.
Yeah, but there is a quid pro quo here. Like, if my friend isn't dealing with putting the power back on or whatever, then I might accidentally pull the network cable out of his until he notices, and then maybe we'll both deal with it at the same time.
Sure, but if it's on a machine that he uses every day, he's going to make sure it gets turned back on.
Right, yeah, I suppose that's the argument for going through the hassle of what we've just talked about.
Right, and also using a bunch of space they already have, nobody's paying extra money for it, but it was just not going to be used. Whereas each of you having to buy 2 or more hard drives is that much more faff. So we definitely see the appeal, but either you trust your friend to a certain degree or you don't. And if you don't, maybe you want your own hardware, maybe you want it in a data center, not at a friend's house.
I think doing it the Joe way makes more sense. If we're talking about really relatively lightweight backup goals, like you don't have a lot of space or, a whole lot of whatever going on, it might start looking attractive to be like, I'm just going to hit Amazon and I'm going to get like a $150 8-year-old Dell small form factor machine, and I'm not even going to put any new hard drives in it. It's only going to have one drive. But you know what? It'll still be a backup target. I'm just going to install my operating system on it and set up ZFS on it and say, hey, friendo, can you plug this in at your house? And done. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that, roughly like $200 price tag with very little extra faffing around will probably sound pretty appealing to a lot of folks. I'm about to do something fairly similar for my own parents who are in a retirement community about half a mile away or so. And my mom, she really needs to have her laptop automatically backed up. And at first I thought that I could just do it to my house. The problem is that, you never know when her laptop is actually going to be turned on or for how long or, how great the Wi-Fi is going to be. They really need a local backup solution. So they asked me to provide one. And that's exactly what I'm about to do. I'm going to drop a little Dell small form factor that I picked up for $150 a couple of years ago. Absolutely hardware unchanged. I'm just going to drop it over there in their apartment and, set it up as an automatic ZFS pull backup server.
Christian, who's a patron, also skipped the queue. He writes, is the quality of service a big consideration for you when you buy new machines? Where do you look for reviews? And how do you rate the service? Is the time needed to actually speak to a person a big factor? Also, what do you consider acceptable to get a computer repaired, including shipping? Can 2 to 3 weeks my current experience be considered okay?
The answer is here, I don't generally look real hard at that because I am already firmly planning not to use any manufacturer warranties for repair of a machine that I care about in the first place. If I'm going to use an OEM warranty on computer equipment at all, I'm going to be using it in the sense that like I've already dealt with the actual operational problem by either repairing or replacing the equipment in question. And if it was by a replacement, so now I'm left with the non-functional box, which has been replaced with a new box. Well, now if I've got an OEM warranty available, sure, I might ship it back off and say, hey, fix this. And when it gets back to me, I've got a refurbished unit that I can sell or use for something different. So in that case, 2 to 3 weeks is about on par with what I typically see, unless you've got something with like a next day on-site policy, like you'll get, sometimes out of the Dells or HPs of the world, even on the fairly inexpensive machines that are targeted to corporate environments. But either way, it's really not a big selling factor to me. I already addressed this with Christian offline, and I advised him and I advise everyone, if you don't already have a good working relationship with a local PC repair place, if you don't do your own repairs, I strongly advise you to start looking around, get around town, like go into a few shops, talk to some folks, like see what kind of vibes you get, what the prices look like. You really want to have that local support available. And it's not so much about whether it was included in the cost of machine, it's just about like, can you get through your day, or are you stuck in this nightmare that he's describing where like you don't have a computer and you just have to ship the whole thing off and you're hoping to get it back 3 weeks later?
Yeah. If you are the type of place that needs, this machine is so critical that we're going to pay Dell all this extra money to make sure that they're going to have someone here to look at it within 4 hours. If it's that critical, you should just have a spare machine that can take over. And right, all your backups are set up so you can just flip a switch and be running off the backup machine in the meantime. And then it doesn't matter if it takes 4 hours or 4 weeks to get the replacement hardware. So if it's critical, you need to go a lot further than a warranty is ever going to do for you. And then if it's not, why pay the extra money for that?
That goes double if it's critical in the sense of the machine as it is currently configured doing the job that it's actually doing. Because what an awful lot of my clients have discovered to their great dismay over the years is when you invite that Dell or HP service technician on premises and you show them the machine and say, this is the one with the bad USB port, you're very likely to get it re-imaged whether you wanted it or not. And they may not even bother asking you first because it's usually corporate policy. Just re-image anything you touch the minute you get your hands on it.
And especially if you're sending it away for 2 to 3 weeks to get a repair, don't expect your files to be on it when it gets back. It's probably not even going to be the same hardware. And so to that end, I've taken a lot of times to purposely buying things without the warranty, like looking at server part deals or something similar for buying hard drives, knowing that, I'm going to use this hard drive until it dies, most likely going to die after the warranty's over already. And even if it does die before that, I'm likely going to want to buy whatever the current best dollar per terabyte drive is at the time, not this model that's old now. And so I, most of the time, not going to bother with the warranty, or especially being in Canada, it's going to be a pain to ship it back to the US anyway. And it's going to take extra time, and it's just not worth it for a free hard drive when I have a lot of hard drives. And so buying things where you're not spending the extra money on the warranty means that I can just afford to have a couple of spares instead. And then my warranty replacement time is the time it takes me to physically go and do it. And that can be a lot better.
And on the flip side, when you're talking about especially things that are targeted toward consumers and like you don't really have the option of buying it without the warranty a lot of the time, sometimes I will look for a longer warranty being offered, not because I ever plan on using it, because to me that's an indication that that manufacturer is more likely to actually be engineering that part or that device to last for longer. Because there is a non-zero cost involved in offering, a 3-year warranty or a 5-year warranty. You actually have to replace things when people tell you they're broken within that time frame and need replacing. So if somebody's offering a 5-year warranty, they're at least expecting the majority of the stuff to last for 3 years, even if they figure most people won't do anything with their warranty, which, let's be honest, again, especially when we're talking about consumer devices, the majority of devices that fail under warranty don't get replaced under warranty, that consumers just chuck them in the skip. However, again, there is a percentage that will actually try to cash in on that warranty. And because wherever you happen to be incorporated is going to force you to honor the warranty that you offered, Like I said, it definitely, a longer warranty implies engineering for longer lasting, and that will mean something to me, even if I never, ever, ever plan on actually using the warranty.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joerest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.